Dude, whenever we left off last week, it was an absolute shit show. So Blizzard was like trying to buff Arcane Mage by 12.5%. Blizzard was trying to buff Frost Death Knight by like 8.5%. People were posting protest screenshots in LFG. It was just a complete mess. Since then, 11.0.5 has come out, and it's honestly somehow been even worse than the protesting and stuff like that was happening the day before. Just let me cook for a second. So, first off, Blizzard started off by nerfing Frost Decay and Arcane Mage, making the changes mostly net neutral. I think that Frost Decay took a very small AoE nerf, about 2.5%. Arcane Mage's changes were, again, mostly net neutral. Great. Blizzard ended up addressing the stuff that ended up being crazy. Then there was, about 100 bugs that were posted on the patch, including things like, Enhancement Shaman not getting their aura merged from last patch to this patch. Elemental Shaman AoE wasn't a bug, but it was a feature of the patch, and how Blizzard had changed their mastery to work to the point where Elemental Shaman was doing about 50% more AoE damage than all the other specializations. And Outlaw Rogue had this bug with Trickster, where they had basically unlimited combo points. Then players went on to abuse this, and I made a video about this, talking about this the other day. Players went on to abuse this playing triple Outlaw Rogue in a bunch of dungeons. And eventually, Blizzard was like, this is an exploit. This led to some first kills for guilds on raid bosses, and Blizzard was like, we're rolling back all these Mythic Plus runs that involved these rogues that were abusing this exploit. Great. It's really silly that it even launched like this, but there's so many more bugs with all these other specializations as well. Paladin had sack on all 5 players. Shadow Priest didn't get their aura buff merged and stuff like that. Anyhow, now there's a new set of class tuning for this next reset that Blizzard announced. Balancer is getting a 5% single target gain, 2% AoE gain. This is pretty good for Mythic Plus. The Mystery Monk changes make them much better at Mythic Plus. Disc is actually getting a very slight buff, and this is going to be relevant in a little bit with the segment that I have coming up. Elemental Shaman is taking a 20% AoE nerf and a 10% single target nerf. Whenever you go and look at how well Elemental Shaman is performing on single target, again, individual raid stats aren't exactly that great, but if you look at how well Elemental Shaman was performing already on just pure single target encounters, they were doing like okay. They were like upper middle of the pack. If you go like Nexus Princess and stuff like that, they were like upper middle of the pack. Now, I don't expect that they can afford a 10% single target nerf. I've also seen the number floated around as well, that it's going to be 9% single target more when the Ascendance bug is fixed. So it looks like there's going to be another bug that's fixed that's going to be a 19% single target nerf, which, if I didn't think that they could afford a 10% single target nerf, I definitely don't think that they can afford a 19% single target nerf. Now, they probably could have afforded the 20% AoE nerf. That probably puts them a lot more in line with other specializations. I think that this takes a spec that was one of I would describe them as marginal tier 1 DPS on last patch, and moves them into a spot where they were the best DPS on this patch, and now they're going to be one of the worst DPS on this patch. And so if you're on this Elemental Shaman roller coaster, I just want to extend an apology to you, because this shit must suck. I think that this must be terrible. All the Warlock specs are getting pretty steep buffs. I think the one that's probably the most relevant for Mythic Plus is this Destro lock buff. I think that people were getting off the AF train a little bit and moving more to this Destro gameplay. An 11% AoE buff and 8.5% single target buff is an insane amount. The Warrior stuff, Warriors are coming back a little bit. I suspect that Warrior, just the nerfs that they ended up receiving were pretty bad. Enhancement Shaman here, notably, and this is also important for a future segment, 10% AoE nerf, 6% single target nerf. It's still a gain from what it was on 10.0 or on 11.0. So it's roughly even in single target and up 10% on AoE for patch 11.0.2, which is insane because Enhancement was very good on that patch. And then Resto Shaman is getting a damage gain, which Resto Shaman needs it. Resto Shaman DPS is pretty beans. Tales from the future here as well. Now we also have an update to Challenger's Peril Affix, with it being nerfed on the weekly reset. Bonus dungeon timer added whenever the Affix is active. So basically what Blizzard has gone and done is now all timers have 90 seconds on top of that. Having 90 additional seconds plus the additional 15 seconds of death penalty is what they believe is what they want the Challenger's Peril to be. And they state that we wish for Challenger's Peril to emphasize precise play and place a greater risk on players' decisions as they progress through higher keystone levels. With this goal in mind, we want to give players a bit more breathing room for these decisions by adding a bonus to Challenger's Peril while maintaining the penalty aspect of the affix. I think this is them trying to tune down the difficulty of the dungeons a little bit, because I think it's like, this is basically stating that they agree that the dungeons were just like straight up too hard. And is it easier to give you 90 seconds on the timer across the board, or is it easier to, you know, remove a bunch of mechanics from all of the dungeons? And I think in general, it's probably easier to just like give you 90 seconds straight across the board. I will say, as somebody who's been pushing pretty seriously this season, it does feel kind of bad to then have like a bunch of your times and stuff invalidated. So like basically we were pushing pretty high this week. You know, I'm like world 48th DPS or whatever. And it does really kind of feel bad to have like your work invalidated, because, you know, there's going to be plus 90 seconds on a timer. Like we just started a City of Threads 15 or whatever, and we were looking like we were going to deplete the key due to, you know, just not playing well enough. And then at some point I was just like, maybe we just still try to stay in here in case we can get the 90 seconds of time rebated to us after the fact. And that to me feels really bad. Like I don't love the feeling of, you know, that. I do think that in general Challengers Peril was just way too punishing, but I think it's does 90 seconds like really fix the problem of the dungeons are too punishing? Like the Challengers Peril itself is too punishing, yes, I agree, but the dungeons themselves just have so many different challenges in ways that really test players. And for like players like me, dude, I play every single day. Challengers Peril actually didn't matter. Like, sure, we depleted keys to the Challengers Peril and it was kind of obnoxious sometimes, but like we're just gonna go again, and very rarely are you able to actually time keys with a bunch of deaths. And so it's pretty common to only see like between 2 and 4 deaths in total in your dungeon for like high keys. Very often do you actually just have like 0 deaths or something like that. So like for me, this doesn't really end up affecting me too much, except for just adding the 90 seconds on top of all of the timers, which is a little bit weird. But for lower end players, I don't even know if this necessarily fixes it. I do think it helps it a little bit. Like if you look at the WoW comments, it's like, yippee, I can die an extra 6 times now. I really don't like that. I don't know. I think that there should be some laddering with the Peril, where, you know, you start off, your first death is free, your second death is 5 seconds, your third death is 10 seconds. That could to me have been the laddering for Challengers Peril to make it feel a little bit more fair, and to where you don't actually have to hit the 90 seconds on the timer. Just in general though, what this does help, and this is something that I really want to talk about, is it actually ends up helping your lust timer. For a lot of dungeons, there are these weird timers where Siege of Borealis is like 33 minutes. I want to say City of Threads is like 35 minutes. Grim Batol is 33 minutes. There's a lot of like those timer dungeons. Dawnbreaker, I want to say like 31 minutes or something like that, where you're pressing these really weird lusts and you're like having to send your lust on CD, and any death ends up impeding into the timer. So the 90 seconds does absolutely help with that. I think that that's actually going to be a big change for, particularly for a dungeon like City of Threads and for Grim Batol. I think that the 90 seconds is absolutely phenomenal for those keys. Just in general, those are kind of my thoughts on it. All right, back to Tales from the Past. Okay, all that being said, let's kind of talk about what we've been seeing so far. First and foremost, let's talk about healers. So last patch on 11.0, we had Resto Shaman on the final week taking up 82% of the share of healer representation, and we were seeing some Disc Priests starting to pop up here and there, but we really didn't know how it was going to work. Now on this week, you know, Resto Shaman's share of the healer pie has been reduced even further, and Disc Priest is really starting to pop up, and to the point where we have, out of the top 6 healers, 3 of them are actually Discipline Priests. So half of the healers in the top 6 are Disc Priest. I think this is a situation where healer balance is much closer than you would expect it to be whenever you're looking at charts like this. I think that Holy Paladin, I've played with Elismir on Holy Paladin. I think that Holy Paladin is absolutely great. I've played with Disc Priest. I think Disc Priest is absolutely phenomenal. I played with Presovoker. I didn't think Presovoker was really that bad. I played with Resto Shaman. Of course, Resto Shaman is great. I haven't had the opportunity to play with, you know, like Holy Priest or Mystery Monk or Resto Druid, but I think that healer balance so far, with all those specializations that I just mentioned, is fairly solid. Now, what I will say, and this is a difficult part of the healer balance, is that if you're doing a Pug Key in LFG, you're very heavily incentivized to invite a Restoration Shaman, because Resto Shaman is the easiest healer to play with. Their utility, their 12-second interrupt, their stops that they can provide to the group, their 10% HP on Downpour and Vigor, 10% each, all very powerful for Restoration Shaman. And it just makes them really easy to play with in a Pug. Now, for high-end keys, this Disc Priest is incredibly valuable, and the reason that they're valuable is because they do about 2 times the amount of damage as the Restoration Shaman. And on top of the fact that they do 2 times the damage of a Resto Shaman, they also have Power Infusion. And this allows things like Enhancement Shaman to really pop off and accelerate their damage in specific spots, especially whenever they're getting buffed by an Aug Evoker on top of that, right? So it's just kind of this multiplicative thing where, you know, power infusion plus augmenting a specialization then increases the value of the power infused target even further, and it makes it very powerful. And so I kind of expect to see, again, Restoration Shaman is incredibly good in some dungeons. Discipline Priest is very good in some dungeons. The dungeons that I think that Disc Priest is actually the best in is probably even things like Dawnbreaker and Necrotic Wake. Necrotic Wake is an absolutely phenomenal dungeon for Disc Priest because the damage that they can provide on things like Surgeon Stitch Flesh and Nalthor is spectacular. It's a little bit weird. They actually really like the kick in Necrotic Wake as well, but they have Shackle Undead, which can mitigate the need for a kick in a lot of aspects. And we've also started to see some of the fastest Necrotic Wakes get put up with the mind control, the flesh crafter technology, where you know, you keep cleavering down, you just MC the mob and then you keep cleavering it down, and that's why you're seeing some of these times be 4.5 minutes under. It's utilizing just that mind control to be able to take that flesh crafter up to the top area and continue to throw it into all of the bosses, and it saves you a considerable amount of time. I saw there was a Nalthor that was like 2 minutes. Absolutely silly stuff that's going on. But yeah, Disc Priest is good, looking good. You also see Prot Paladin starting to take a little bit more share than Prot Warrior. This is like a couple of very specific people that are playing this Prot Paladin. If you look at the all-tank leaderboard, there's still a decent amount of Warriors. But like Yoda and Drogo are taking up a bunch of this Paladin spot. But I think in general, it's one of the spots that both of these tanks are incredibly good. You can even get away with like a Bear Druid or a Blood Decay as well. I've even seen some Vengeance Demon Hunters excel. A lot of tanking comes down to individual skill, and there's some seasons that the spec is the most important thing, but more often than not for tanks in particular, their ability to be able to survive and their ability to be able to make routes that work for them and their ability to be able to just like play the game as best as possible is the most important thing. And so you're seeing split projections as to what's the best specializations. I mean, you're seeing some tanks like, oh gosh, you're seeing some tanks like be pretty split as to what they actually think is going to be the best tank. I know Kira thinks that Warrior's better than Paladin. Yoda, it looks like he believes that Paladin's better than Warrior. Looks like the top tank in the world is playing this Warrior as opposed to playing a Paladin. It's kind of tough to say. Now let's talk about next patch. So on this next reset, we're going to see Enhancement Shaman probably be the main character that you're playing through in Mythic Plus. Enhancement Shaman does absolutely nutso damage right now, and they're not getting better next week, but they're going to be the best DPS to play through. A composition that works really well with the Enhancement Shaman is like Aug Evoker plus Frost Decay. There's also probably like Aug Evoker plus Assassination Rogue if you want to play something that's maybe a little bit higher DPS. I don't think the Frost Decay is doing as much damage as the Assassination Rogue. You could in theory play triple DPS as well. I've also seen some like DK Boomkin comps. I've seen, you know, DK Assassination Rogue if you want to play triple DPS. You can maybe even get a Ret Pally in the mix. But by far the biggest staple is going to end up being this Enhancement Shaman. And dude, you have seen some, if you've been paying attention, you have seen some fucking crazy clips this week. Right here, we have a team of Yoda, Greg, Kess, Nade, and Zorthus. And Zorthus does 32 million DPS during this burn. It is absolutely fucking crazy. And they one-phase Ingram Malok on a 17 Misotirna Scythe. They have the fastest Misotirna Scythe in the world, and a lot of it comes down to Zorthus just absolutely fucking popping off. Like, he's playing dude, look at how many dogs he has out here. He's playing a Flowing Spirits, I think is the name of the talent, and he just completely full sends this boss, and it's great. I actually like playing with Enhancement Shaman. I think Enhancement Shaman's super sick. You know, Frosty K is going to see their share, I think, lower a little bit. I think we're going to enter a bit of a plateau in terms of like what we're seeing with the meta, where there's probably about 6 or 7 DPS that end up being represented. But I think it's going to end up being fairly solid. I mean, this is a better meta than you normally see. A couple of tanks that are being represented, a couple healers that are being represented, where most of the healers are fairly close to one another. That's all you can reasonably ask for in a metagame. It's been a bit of a shit show. I haven't been loving the whiplash that we've been seeing with a lot of these changes over the past week. I think that's been probably the most annoying part as well, because there's things, dude, like Elemental Shaman, for example. I don't think anybody was like coming into this patch and was like, yeah, Ellie needs a buff. Ellie was like one of the top, like I was saying earlier, like 6 or 7 DPS. Nobody was like, yeah, Ellie needs a buff. They just like stayed the exact same in terms of where they were power level wise. That's perfect. But instead they got buffed by 100% and then they got nerfed by 100%, and they're just like, okay, well, now the spec is way worse than it was before. It sucks. I don't know. Anyways, I think the whiplash is the thing that's maybe a little bit the most concerning. I'm prepping a top 5 tips video, another one of those. So stay tuned if you're looking for content like that. I hope to see you guys in next week's video where we talk about what we've seen this week in Mythic Plus. Goodbye.